A mysterious figure looks above him in the dead of night as he slumbers Ryu's greatest foe, who is so close yet so far away, Myria. Welcome to Villainalysis. A quick summary of who she is. An ancient goddess who enforces eternal peace through oppressive control faces rebellion when her creations, tired of living in a stagnant world without free will, rise against her in divine tyranny. The very foundation of Myria's being in Breath of Fire 3 rests upon her incomprehensible divine power and eternal nature, making her not merely a villain but a fundamental force of the game's universe. Her godhood manifests in ways that transcend conventional villainy by placing her in a realm of primordial entities who shape existence itself. Unlike mortal antagonists whose power can be quantified or rivaled, Myria operates on a cosmic scale where her abilities blur the line between deity and natural law. Myria's power expresses itself most profoundly in her absolute authority over life and matter. As the architect of the game's world order, she demonstrates the terrifying capacity to both create and unmake reality according to her will. The Guardians, and artificial beings of immense power who enforce her rule, stand as living testaments to her creative might, each crafted to serve a specific function in maintaining her dominion. Historical ruins scattered throughout the game world whisper of her destructive capabilities, suggesting entire civilizations have been erased when they threaten her vision of order. This dual nature of creator-destroyer establishes her not as just a mere ruler, but as something akin to a malevolent demiurge, shaping the clay of existence while reserving the right to crush what she has made. Her combat abilities in the final confrontation reveal the terrifying scope of her power. The battle progresses through multiple phases, each representing a different aspect of her divinity. From serene goddess to monstrous avatar of wrath, this metamorphic nature suggests her true form is beyond mortal comprehension, with the player only glimpsing fragments of her full power. The necessity of Ryu awakening his complete brood potential to challenge her underscores how her strength exists on an entirely different plane from other foes in the game. Where other antagonists might be defeated through martial skill or magic, Myria can only be opposed by another divine entity. Myria's immortality transforms her from a powerful being into a personification of the universe's stagnation. Her eternal existence has granted her infinite patience and governance, allowing her to manipulate events across centuries with the precision of a master weaver. This timescale of operation makes her fundamentally alien to moral comprehension, where humans and even dragons measure their lives in decades. Myria's plans unfold across epochs. The dragon clan's near extinction, the rise and fall of nations, and the careful breeding of the brood bloodline all represent moves in a game she has been playing for longer than recorded history. This immortality comes at a profound psychological cost. Myria's eternal perspective has eroded her ability to value individual lives or recognize the beauty in mortal transience. Where mortal beings find meaning in their finite existence, Myria sees only endless cycles of destruction that must be controlled. Her interactions with characters demonstrate this disconnect. She refers to mortals as children, not out of affection, but because she genuinely perceives them as ephemeral, irresponsible beings requiring her eternal supervision. The tragedy lies in how her immortality has trapped her in this role. Having existed as a goddess for so long, she cannot conceive of existence without her divine stewardship. What makes Myria's godhood particularly terrifying is how it combines unlimited power with profoundly limited perspective. Her immortality has granted her infinite time to perfect her control, but has simultaneously prevented her from growing emotionally or philosophically. While mortals adapt, learn, and change, Myria remains static, an eternal monument to her own ideology. This explains why she cannot comprehend Ryu's rebellion. In her worldview, her absolute power should make her resistance unthinkable. Yet the mortal will still want freedom and persist to find it despite her omnipotence. The game suggests that true divinity requires more than just power and immortality. It requires wisdom and the capacity for change, qualities Myria lost long ago. Her defeat at Ryu's hands becomes inevitable, not because she lacks power, but because her eternal existence has made her incapable of understanding the very beings she seeks to control. In this way, the story presents a profound critique of absolute power, that even godlike might becomes meaningless when divorced from empathy and growth. Myria's tragedy is that, for all her divine attributes, she remains trapped in her own nature, unable to evolve beyond the role she assigned herself eons ago. Myria's reign over the world isn't maintained through brute divine force alone, though, but through intricate, centuries-long spanning web of psychological manipulation that makes some of her achievements some of the most disturbing manipulations of gaming's history. Her deception operates on multiple levels, from grand societal engineering to intimate, personal betrayals, creating a system of control so pervasive that most of her subjects don't even realize they're enslaved. Unlike typical villains who rule through obvious tyranny, Myria understands that most of the durable power comes from making people believe they're exercising free will while subtly guiding every choice. This makes her not just a goddess, but the ultimate architect of a carefully constructed illusion of reality. Myria's most brilliant manipulation comes in the form of Windia's mysterious plague, a masterclass in manufactured dependency. By introducing a devastating disease and then positioning herself as the sole provider of the cure, she creates a perfect cycle of crisis and salvation. This isn't merely political strategy, it's divine gaslighting on a civilization-wide scale. The plague serves multiple purposes. It keeps the population docile and grateful, justifies her authoritarian measures, and provides a reminder of humanity's fragility without her protection. The genius lies in how she makes people beg for their own subjugation, believing their survival depends on her benevolence rather than recognizing she engineered their suffering. This mirrors real-world totalitarian strategies, where regimes create problems to position themselves as the only solution, but Myria's version operates on a metaphysical level beyond that. She doesn't just control the cure, she controls the very nature of health and disease. Perhaps Myria's most personally cruel manipulations involve her treatment of the Guardians, particularly Deus and Bleu. These powerful beings, originally created as overseers, became case studies of psychological domination. Myria doesn't merely command obedience, she systematically breaks their will through a combination of gaslighting, intermittent reinforcement, and the erosion of identity. Deus's storyline reveals how Myria transforms a once free spirit into a reluctant servant, not through obvious force, but by convincing her that resistance is both futile and morally wrong. The tragedy intensifies when we realize some guardians may have originally been dependent beings that Myria then recruited and reprogrammed, making her control a form of existential theft. This creates haunting questions. How many of her enforcers are willing servants versus broken prisoners? And which fate is more horrifying? Myria's manipulation of the brood bloodline represents deception operating across biological generations. Like a divine eugenicist, she has carefully guided the brood's development, ensuring each generation remains just powerful enough to be useful, but never enough to threaten her. This manifests in her treatment of Ryu's lineage. She doesn't merely oppose the brood, she cultivates them like a gardener pruning a dangerous but valuable plant. The depth of this manipulation becomes clear when we realize Ryu's entire journey may have been subtly influenced by Myria's design, with each challenge and loss serving to steer him toward her desired outcome. The most chilling possibility that even Ryu's rebellion was anticipated and factored into her plans as a necessary pressure valve for mortal frustration, making his hard-won victory just another move in her eternal game. On an individual level, Myria perfects the art of making people believe they're making independent decisions while actually following her script. Characters like Rei and Tipo exemplify this. Their fates feel like random misfortune, but in reality serve Myria's larger goals of controlling Ryu's development. She employs what psychologists call illusion of control tactics, allowing mortals small victories that ultimately advance her agenda. This explains why she permits resistance movements to exist, not from oversight, but because controlled opposition helps identify threats and reinforces her narrative that only she can maintain order. Myria's most insidious power lies in her ability to manipulate not just events, but the very perception of history. The game's fragmented lore suggests she has systematically erased and rewritten historical records, making rebellion unthinkable by eliminating examples of successful resistance. This extends to personal memories as well. Subtle hints imply she may have altered or suppressed the memories of key characters, including Ryu himself, at various points. The existential horror here is profound. If a goddess controls both reality and how it's remembered, can truth ever exist? This makes Ryu's journey not just physical, but epistemological. He must reconstruct reality itself from the fragments Myria has allowed to remain. Myria's crowning achievement is that how she frames her tyranny as compassionate necessity. Through careful propaganda and selective benevolence, she's convinced entire civilizations that her absolute control is preferable to freedom's chaos. This reflects real-world authoritarian strategies, but with divine efficiency. When a goddess tells you oppression is love, who can argue? The brilliance lies in how she doesn't deny suffering exists under her rule, but positions it as the lesser evil, compared to an imagined apocalyptic alternative. This creates what philosophers call false dichotomy, making people choose between her control and total annihilation, when other possibilities might exist. The game's climax gains its power from Ryu rejecting this manufactured binary, asserting that flawed freedom is preferable to perfect control. The psychological profile of a divine manipulator is defined within this particular example, where we analyze Myria's techniques, and it reveals a being who has perfected psychological domination over millennia. She employs tactics such as intermittent reinforcement, where she's alternating punishment and rewarding certain dependencies on her. Manufactured scarcity, controlling essential resources like the plague cure. Social proof, using guardians and priests to model the desired behaviors. And the loaded language, framing all resistance as just ungrateful and reckless, along with controlled opposition, in which she allows limited dissent to identify future threats. This makes her regime terrifyingly realistic. Her methods mirror those used by real cult leaders and authoritarian regimes, just executed with supernatural efficiency. The profound horror lies in recognizing how easily we might accept her rule if born into her world. How difficult it is to question a system where the goddess seems to genuinely care, even as she destroys individuality. Despite Myria's brilliance, her system contains seeds of its own destruction. The very complexity of her deceptions creates vulnerabilities. Each manipulated individual represents a potential point of failure. More importantly, she underestimates the human and dragon capacity for irrational hope and connection. Where she sees only controllable variables, real bonds between Ryu and his companions that defy her calculations, reflect a fundamental truth about control. The more comprehensive the system of manipulation, the more catastrophic its eventual failure. Myria's tragedy is that after millennia of perfecting her methods, she couldn't imagine beings choosing freedom over security, making her psychological fortress impregnable yet brittle. When Ryu's ragtag band of misfits breaches her defenses, it's not through the greater power, but by embodying the chaotic, messy connections she could never factor into her equations. At the heart of Myria's character lies one storytelling's most profound tragedies, the corruption of absolute love into absolute control. Unlike typical villains motivated by greed or vengeance, Myria genuinely believes herself to be the savior of creation in this world, making her subsequent atrocities all the more heartbreaking. Her motivations spring from what philosophers might call the burden of eternity. Having witnessed countless civilizations rise and fall through cycles of self-destruction, she has concluded that free will is fundamentally incompatible with survival. This transforms her from a mere antagonist into a dark messiah figure, sacrificing morality itself on the altar of preservation. The tragedy intensifies when we realize her assessment isn't entirely wrong. The game's world does not appear to be prone to catastrophic conflicts without her intervention, making her flawed solution almost understandable in its terrible logic. Myria's relationship to creation is deeply maternal. Though twisted through eons of disappointment, she refers to mortals as my children, not as empty rhetoric, but with the possessive desperation of a parent who cannot let go. This maternal symbolism manifests physically in her boss battle's first phase, where she appears as a serene, angelic figure cradling the party in what looks to be a loving embrace, only for this image to curdle into a monstrous domination when challenged. Her tragedy mirrors that of mythological figures like Gaia or Tiamat, primordial mother goddesses who became destructive when their creations outgrew them. The extreme sadness in Myria's character comes from recognizing that her godhood was trapped in this role. Having assumed responsibility for creation's survival, she cannot conceive of abdicating that duty, even when her methods have become more harmful than the chaos she prevents. Myria represents the dark side of utopian idealism, the belief that a perfect world justifies any means required to achieve it. Her symbolism connects the real-world totalitarian ideologies that promise paradise through control, but also to deeper philosophical questions of the nature of existence. Is a world without suffering worth having if it also lacks joy? Can peace maintained through constant surveillance truly be called peace? The game answers these questions through Myria's crumbling empire, suggesting that life requires imperfection to have meaning. Her most tragic failure, in my opinion, is being unable to see this paradox that her perfect order is itself a form of living death. This transforms her from villain into cautionary symbol, representing how even the noblest intentions become monstrous when pursued absolutely. Beneath Myria's omnipotent facade lies a startling vulnerability. She is, at her core, a deity who has lost faith in her own creation. This makes her a dark mirror to Ryu's journey, where the protagonist, Ryu, learns to trust others despite their flaws. Myria's eternity has convinced her that this trust is a folly. Her arc inverts the typical hero's journey. She began as what we might call a benevolent goddess, but countless disappointments transformed her into something tyrannical. This speaks to one of humanity's deepest fears. The infinite patience might eventually run out, and that even a god's love could turn into despair. The symbolism here connects to existential questions about a silent or absent God. Myria represents what might happen if God decided to intervene too much rather than too little, trading humanity's spiritual growth for physical safety. Myria embodies the philosophical concept that absolute power doesn't corrupt so much as it calcifies. Her immortality has frozen her into a single moment of cosmic parenting, unable to adapt as her children mature. This makes her regime not only oppressive, but artistically sterile. Her world lacks music, vibrant culture, innovation, because these require freedom to fail. The tragedy deepens when we recognize that her stagnation is self-perpetuating. By preventing civilizations from learning through mistakes, she ensures they never develop the wisdom that might make her guidance unnecessary. She becomes like an overprotective parent, stunting the child's growth, all the while genuinely believing that this protection is vital. The symbolic resonance here touches on everything from helicopter parenting to civilizational development. What does protection become prison? Perhaps Myria's most humanizing tragedy is her profound isolation. As the last, or possibly only, true deity in her world, she exists without peers, no equals, or anyone who could possibly understand her burden. This divine loneliness has twisted her perspective as surely as any malevolence might have. When one has no one to question one's decisions, absolute certainty becomes its own form of madness. This symbolism here is heartbreaking. She surrounds herself with servants and worshippers, but no companions. Even her relationship with the Guardians is that of master to tools rather than equals. This makes her final confrontation with Ryu particularly poignant. In another reality, they might have been kindred spirits, the only two beings who could truly understand each other's burdens. Instead, they become mortal enemies, with Ryu representing everything Myria has forgotten. That connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires freedom. Myria's complexity as a villain is that her assessment of mortal nature isn't entirely wrong. The game's lore suggests that before her intervention, the world was indeed trapped in endless cycles of dragon-human conflict. This creates profound moral ambiguity. Is she wrong to intervene, or just in her methods? The symbolism here reflects real-world debates about interventionism versus isolationism, about whether it's better to let societies make their own mistakes or impose order from outside. Myria represents the ultimate end of the ruling class's burden ideology, a being so convinced of her superior understanding that she considers herself obligated to rule regardless of her subjects' wishes. Her tragedy is that she cannot see the third option: to guide without controlling, to help without dominating. On a metaphysical level, Myria represents the breakdown of the divine-human covenant. In most theologies, gods agree to limit their intervention in exchange for worship and moral growth from mortals. Myria has violated this compact, refusing to allow creation the space to grow beyond her. This transforms her from goddess into something more like a cosmic prison warden. Her once holy duty is now just self-justifying cycle of control. The profound tragedy is that in seeking to protect creation's body, she has damned its soul. Her world survives but cannot truly live. This makes her final defeat not just a victory for freedom, but a necessary step in the universe's maturation, as painful as a child leaving home or a student surpassing their master. Ultimately, Myria's tragedy is one of failed growth. She possesses infinite power, but cannot evolve beyond her self-assigned role as a cosmic caretaker. In this, she becomes a warning about the dangers of refusing change, about how even the mightiest beings can become prisoners of their own nature. Her symbolism resonates beyond the game, asking players uncomfortable questions. What beliefs do we cling to long past their usefulness? What damage do we cause while convinced we're helping? And most painfully, how might we ourselves become Myrias in a miniature, enforcing our own small tyrannies out of love, out of fear, out of the terrible, beautiful conviction that we know best? Myria's tyranny is self-defeating. The more control she enforces, the more rebellion she unknowingly cultivates. By suppressing free will, she ensures that those under her rule will inevitably resist, not out of malice, but out of an innate desire for autonomy. The brood, humanity, and even her own guardians eventually turn against her because her order is suffocating rather than sustaining. Her belief that absolute power can eliminate dissent only proves its own fallacy. Oppression does not erase defiance, it fuels it. Despite her omniscient posturing, Myria consistently underestimates the resilience of mortals, particularly Ryu and his allies. She dismisses them as insignificant, believing no mortal could ever rival her divinity. Yet Ryu's growth, his bonds with others, his mastery of the brood's power, and his defiance of fate proves her wrong. Her arrogance blinds her to the possibility that those she deems weak could ever challenge her, making her defeat not just the typical physical failure, but an ideological one. Myria's weakness is her inability to comprehend emotions beyond her own warped sense of duty. She sees love as control, freedom as chaos, and resistance as ingratitude. This emotional disconnect makes her overconfident. She cannot fathom why anyone would reject her perfect order, leaving her unprepared for rebellion. Her reliance on deception further isolates her because she rules through lies. She can never trust or be trusted. In the end, her need for control is her undoing. She is so certain of her own infallibility that she never considers she might be wrong until it is too late. Myria's defeat was not merely a triumph of mortals over a god. It was the inevitable collapse of a system built of her own contradictions. She sought to eliminate chaos by extinguishing free will, yet in doing so, she made rebellion the only possible outcome. She believed herself infallible, yet Her inability to comprehend the value of mortal bonds, growth, and even suffering rendered her blind to the flaws in her design. She ruled through deception, yet never questioned why truth kept resurfacing. In the end, her greatest weakness was not Ryu's power, but her own refusal to change, a goddess who shaped the world, yet could not bend. Thus, her empire fell not by the sword, but by the weight of its own impossibility. Thank you for listening. Please consider subscribing, commenting, and sharing the video. I greatly appreciate you being here and taking the time to view my content, as time is one of the most valuable things we have in this world. I might take a suggestion from you for a future video. Please, post below. Thank you.